My name is Carl Christofferson, visual communications student with the Rochester Institute of Technology. In this podcast mini-series on visual communications, I briefly explore social issues and the principles of communication in addressing this social issue. I recently had the opportunity to interview Tullis Johnson and Heather Gring, curators and archivists at the Burchfield Penney Art Center in Buffalo, New York. In the interview, we talk about the mission of the Art Center, and I asked them about the social issues they address through the Art Center. One is the environment. We talk about the work of Charles Burchfield, an American painter who was a naturalist and who was an influential precursor to the environmental movement. In this episode, we talk about Burchfield's background and the factors that influenced his life and what he communicates in his artistic works. In episode 2, we discuss further Charles Burchfield's use of semiotics and conventions in his artistic works. I hope you enjoy this podcast mini-series. So today we're with Tullis Johnson and Heather Gring of the Burchfield Penney Art Center here in Buffalo. So thank you both for being with me. Question, maybe start with you, Tullis. Maybe you could tell me about the museum and your mission here.
The Burchfield Penney Art Center is a museum dedicated to the art and vision of Charles E. Burchfield and distinguished artists of Buffalo, Niagara, and Western New York. Through our affiliation with SUNY Buffalo State, we encourage learning and celebrate our richly creative and diverse community. So what that means is that we celebrate our region. We celebrate the artists in this part of New York State. There are communities of people in Buffalo who do really great artwork, and so we want to celebrate those things as well.
So let me ask you, what is the main social issues being addressed here at the Art Center?
Well, if I can speak to that. So looking over these questions beforehand, I think Tully and I were in agreement that there's no one main issue that we deal with. We deal with an entire community, an entire region, and so there are many, many complex issues that all intersect, and we try to make space here to address a number of them. But Tullis, do you want to speak about the environmental focus?
Well, the Burchfield Penney Art Center is the first LEED certified green art museum in New York State. And that's really important. I mean, if you build a new building on a SUNY campus, it has to be LEED certified now. But we were really early in that transition. But it also really matches up with what we focus on here. Charles Burchfield, he was an environmentalist before that movement existed. And as he grew up in an age of industry towns all over the regions where he painted, that were sort of disappearing or falling apart, and he painted those things. He lived in a town where there were coal mines, and these coal mines would leach sulfur out into the streams and rivers near his home. He was reading things like Rachel Carson or Stuart Udall. He was reading authors who were beginning to articulate what the environmental movement would become, and so the movement really finds its footing in the late 1960s, and Burchfield died in 1967. So he is really a link between the naturalists of the 19th century and the environmental movement. So this is central to what we do. So another way to think about this is if you think about the notion of sustainability. Well, here at the Burchfield Penney Art Center, we are sustaining the artistic culture of this region. We're making sure that the artists of the past and the artists of the present and the artists of the future all have a voice. And I think it's really important to link that with this idea of environmentalism. It's much bigger than just looking at how we use resources. It's also about how we celebrate people.
One thing I heard you talk about is sort of the environment that Charles Burchfield lived in as a youth. Mm-hmm. It sounds to me that was a big impact on his life. Could you elaborate a little bit more on his childhood and some of the exposure that you just mentioned?
Sure. So he grew up in Salem, Ohio. He was born in Ashtabula Harbor, north of Salem, not too far from Cleveland. Ashtabula was a port for the shipment of coal. And so you would wonder where that coal comes from. It came from places like Salem. In Salem, at the end of the 19th century, there were dozens of coal mines, and these coal mines were in the woods behind Burchfield's house. he was born in 1893. By the early 1900s, a lot of these coal mines are shutting down.
So you're thinking that maybe he saw this growing up, and how did he think that affected him as an artist later?
Well, he saw things like the sulfur leaching out of these coal mines. He even, in about 1919, after serving in the Army, he came home and he decided, comes back to Salem, and there's a few different experiences he has that really enrich his sort of perspective on this. And he wrote in a sketch for a painting called Storm over Irondale from 1920 that life at Irondale is hideously raw and crude. It is splendid in its very brutality.
In the next episode, we discuss Charles Burchfield and his use of conventions and semiotics. Thanks for listening.